Welcome to my show. I am with a guest here. His name is Michael Barnes. Michael Barnes, how are you, sir?
I'm very well. How are you?
I'm fine, thank you very much, sir. Firstly, we know you are a licensed addiction and professional counselor, and you are also the founder of Michael Barnes Family. Can you walk us through the beginning, how you walked through those journey from the beginning, and how it's going with you now, sir?
So I've been actually in the field of addiction treatment for 42 years, and I've been in the family work for 32 years. And so prior to that, I grew up in a family with addiction and trauma, and trying to find my way, through academia and failing because I just hadn't found what I really wanted to do. And when I found psychology for the first time, it opened the door to my family and helped me to begin to understand not just human nature, but my own experience, my own life experience. And that was the kind of thing that turned my life around. I was starting to have my own experience with drinking and drug use and things like that. And um, had I not found that outlet and begun to understand myself, I think I would have headed down the same path as others in my extended family have done.
All right, sir. I would like to ask, how long have you been in this addiction counseling expert? How long have you been doing this, sir?
42 years in the addiction world and 32 in the family as a family therapist, and I treat trauma um, primarily in trauma. So I find it hard to separate trauma and addiction because they're so common co-occurring disorders, particularly when families are dealing with this progressive deterioration of their loved one's life, and they get very traumatized by um, the trips to the hospital, trips, car crashes and overdoses, that we tend to think that family's job is to support their loved one, which it is, but it's also they need to enter recovery themselves to get some help for their own trauma. So um, I don't distinguish. I mean, I distinguish the difference between the two, but in my work with families, it's almost always both issues.
All right, sir. Do you have any book or do you have any website someone can go to learn more about your addiction and even trauma therapy stuff?
Sure. I have my own book, which you can actually see it on my bookcase over there with the blue circle. I thought I had one on my desk, but I don't. It's called When the Solution Becomes the Problem, helping families struggling with addiction and trauma. They can get it at my website or on Amazon. So um, my website address is www.drmikebarnes, drmikebarnes.com. And it really is my philosophy. It's my textbook for the program that I developed. And I taught at the University of Colorado using that as my um, textbook as well. So, but it's actually written for families. It's not an academic book. It's written so that a mom or dad or a parent or partner could understand what their loved one is going through and what they're going through.
All right. Thank you very much for that, sir. Sir, please
Sure.
can you tell us, like, in your own way, how can you define addiction?
Well, addiction is a chronic, progressive, and potentially fatal illness. And chronic basically meaning that it has multiple factors that create it. It's usually genetic or what we consider epigenetic, which is how does the environment that the person live in turn those genes on or turn those genes off, and so they've studied twins who were identical, had the same DNA, and found that those kids that were adopted into families with addiction often became addicted themselves. Kids that um, were adopted into families that did not have addiction rarely developed addiction themselves. So that trauma is at the root of a lot of it. And just home life is at the root of a lot of it, like the environment that we grow up in. And so it's an illness that impacts uh, part of the brain, the central part of the brain called the limbic system, the mesolimbic dopamine um, pleasure centers of the brain. And it kind of is treated by the brain like other urgently needed functions for survival once the person develops this dependency. And so, I think the primary fundamental symptoms of this illness are compulsion to use it. Like in the beginning states, compulsion is just thinking about it a lot or wanting to go. When I go out, I want to party with my friends all the time. And then that compulsion shifts to I'll only go out if I'm going to use my drug of choice or alcohol. And then as time goes on, it becomes the urgency to avoid withdrawal and tolerance. The nervous system becomes dependent on that drug to function normally. And so that when we quit using it, we get very sick. And depending on what kind of drug it is, if it's a depressant drug like alcohol, the nervous system gets really agitated and activated. We have a lot of anxiety. If the person is taking an activating drug such as cocaine or methamphetamine, then when they come off of it, they get really exhausted because they've been exhibiting so much energy over time. So there's compulsion to use, then loss of control is the second symptom. And loss of control is not that every time someone uses, they just use so much, although in the end of the addictive process, that's what it looks like. But what it really is that the person can't predict beyond a shadow of a doubt what's going to happen once they start using. And sometimes they may use socially, but other times they may, have blackouts or not remember what happened or, wreck a car, those kinds of things. And so that's the second symptom. And then the third symptom is use despite adverse consequences. And what that really means is if I'm now having compulsion to use all the time and I can't predict what's going to happen, then I'm going to have some bad outcomes. And most people, when they have bad outcomes, quit doing what if it hurts to do it, you usually stop doing it. But and with addiction, that kind of brain-based disease process starts to happen, and we kind of use our defense mechanisms and we rationalize that, oh well, that was an accident and it wasn't my fault, it was someone else's fault. Um, or we just flat out deny it. That's not the way it happened. So we use our defenses to convince us that we can continue to do that, even though the evidence is to the contrary, that it's become a problem. And so if you think about those three symptoms, compulsion, loss of control, and then use despite the consequences, you can see how it becomes a spiral. It's often characterized as a picture of a spiraling kind of a siphon where it just takes the person deeper and deeper into the illness and more and more medical problems, more and more emotional problems, more and more social problems. So um, that's that's how I really understand the illness, but I do see it as a disease process. It's a lot of people who don't. I just think there's a lot of research evidence that would support the idea that it is, and the fact that it's a chronic illness rather than an acute illness. It means I have to learn to live with it for forever, and it gets easier certainly over time, but it um, it never goes away.
All right, sir. I know you said it never goes away, but I just still want to ask if there is any effective way to treat addiction.
Well, there's a lot of, and again, addiction treatment has become more medical. It used to be a lot more counseling, but there's a lot more involvement with medications. And 40 years ago, we would have never thought to give someone an antidepressant medication right as they were quitting, because we wanted to see if the depression would last. And today we're much more attuned to how medication works in the recovery process. So number one is getting appropriate medical um, uh, evaluation, assessment, get treated for a lot of the medical complications, getting on the right medications that gives us kind of a head start on the process. The second part is beginning to kind of look at the root of the of addiction. What is it? Kind of being educated on the disease concept, being educated on um, the kind of consequences in the long term that if they don't stop. Um, I think the biggest part of that is education allows for new insights, and new insights allow for new solutions, and that people can then begin to look at changing their behavior and learning how to cope more effectively with shame and guilt and pain and remorse and grief and the things that people don't think about. Someone who, I think the average person who doesn't know addiction thinks, well, that client's gonna be so grateful initially, but just to be off of it. And initially, there's often a lot of grief, and the grief is tied to that. That's always sort of been my crutch. That's always been the way if I felt bad, I knew I could feel good. And and that is biologically driven. There are neurotransmitters in the brain that um, make us feel really good when we use, and there are others that remember everything around when the person's using, so that the next time they see that, it reminds them, oh, I should probably use. And so just education, therapy, self-evaluation, family therapy, and again, the family is as impacted by the addiction as the client is. And so, if the client begins to change and go into sobriety and go into recovery, and the family doesn't, it usually ends up with conflict in the family. So, family work is a key part of that. And then the last part is social support, and the idea of finding other people who have been through it, other people who when you're having a bad day or I'm having a bad day, that I can go to just vent, or to get some, have someone say, look, we all have bad days, so you know. Um, the thing that's most controversial within the field is the belief that relapse is part of recovery. The idea of lapsing back into old behavior happens, and it happens in all chronic illness. But our target behavior is to never have another lapse, right? Like that's our goal. But and there are a lot of people in the field that say that it's dangerous to tell people that relapsing is part of the process. But I take a more chronic disease management perspective that says, let's educate people on what is typical. Let's educate people on what happens, so that when it does happen, if it happens, that they don't I tell the families that I work with, how do you have a conversation about a relapse that it only lasts 3 days rather than 3 years? And the idea of how do we help that person get back on track rather than be mad at them, be angry with them, be ashamed of them, when every diabetic has relapses into old behavior. Every person with multiple sclerosis has periods of time where they go back into previous symptom states. Addiction's not that different.
All right, sir. I want to um ask, what advice can you give to someone that is recovering from addiction? What advice could you give such person?
So the first thing that I tell people, and they don't particularly like to hear it, is that it takes about a year for the person to really start feeling a lot better. And so it's really this, it's kind of like, the onion, unpeeling the onion kind of thing, in that initially there's a lot of relief, but then there's also a lot of kind of remembering the things that happened. So there's also a lot of struggle. Their families are trying to figure out how do we talk to this person again? We don't want to cause them to have a relapse. And so for them to understand that it is really a process of growth for everyone, not just for themselves, that over the course of time, getting this. So recovery is kind of broken into 3 stages. And I would want them to know there's a difference between being abstinent, like I could just quit, but not make any changes. And and what that's going to do is I'm still going to have all those problems. I'm still going to run into those problems. So a lot of people will say, well, I don't have an illness. I just had a bad habit. And so, I think the first recommendation is to accept the reality that it's a medical illness. It's a process, and that it will take um, a fairly long time, a year. For some, it's 2 years to actually rewire everything again to feel better. And then after that period of time, then that person moves into what we call recovery, which is not just staying sober, but also getting healthy physically, and getting a healthy family relationship, and getting your job back on task. And so often, I think, it's funny, I'm just sort of talking out loud my answer, but I think the biggest recommendation I would make is be patient, slow down. There's a reason AA says take it one day at a time. And that is that the more they start wishing they were down the road and all the problems were gone, the less energy and less awareness they have to work on the problems that are still there. So slow down. Understand that it's going to take a while, but you have to do it one step at a time, would be the thing that I would say. But if they don't accept the reality of their circumstances, they will probably always struggle to be abstinent, that they'll just relapse all the time.
All right. Thank you very much for that, sir. Um,
Sure.
what do you think technology will play in the future in addiction? What do you
That is,
think technology will play?
it's a great question. I was in an airport about a month ago, and I met this woman, and she works for this company that, so think about like opiates, and the withdrawal symptoms are so, it's like the worst flu you could ever have. And like people talk about their joints hurt and their bones hurt. It's just, it's not going to kill you, but it's going to be horrible. And so when I was talking to her, she said, we've created a device that we can attach to a person. I think it's to their ear that takes the withdrawal away. That's like, that's earth shattering. Like, that's the biggest problem that we have with people with opiate use disorder wanting to leave treatment because it's too uncomfortable. And so I think we're going to see an influx of technology that's going to be remarkable. And so I see it in a couple ways. Number one is for individuals with trauma, there's so much technology these days with helping them to regulate their autonomic nervous system. Like that when they get anxious, they can, um, you know, it gives them biofeedback, um, um, kind of immediately on the spot. There are little machines called Muse machines that you put it on the front of your head and it teaches you how to meditate. It teaches you how to calm your nervous system down. There's a process called biosound that gives you kind of biometric waves of where your nervous system is. So I think we're going to be working a lot with technology to address the trauma aspect of it. The second thing that I think is going to be really earth shattering, to be quite honest, is there are, so a Fitbit is like a smartwatch. And so they have technology where you could either have an Apple Watch like I have or put a Fitbit on, and it's going to give us information about, like, when a person comes out of a group, what their heart rate was in the group, what their blood pressure was. Like, so often clients are so disconnected from their body that when you ask them, what do you feel? It's like they've been so intoxicated so long, they don't even know what they feel anymore. And when you say to them, "Are you okay?" You look anxious, and they'll say, "No, no, no, I'm good." And it's just they're so used to that that we're going to be able to tell clients in real time, here's what your nervous system is doing. And we're going to be able to, if someone's out of treatment and they relapse, we're going to be able to look at what their body was doing in the hours before the relapse to teach them new ways to stay sober, new ways to know when to ask for help, know when to call someone. And so that kind of biometric um, is invaluable to help someone reconnect with their body and reconnect with their emotional state. It'll tell us if they're sleeping. It'll tell us if having REM sleep. It'll tell us if it's restful sleep, how many hours. So often clients will say, "I didn't sleep at all last night." But then when you look at the data, they actually slept 5 or 6 hours. But they think about the times that they were awake. And so that's going to be really amazing, the technology associated with real-time measurement of body-based response. And then the last one, I think, is going to be, medicine and like things like this ear thing that this person developed so that we don't have withdrawal anymore. I think that's going to, we're not going to have people running out of treatment because they're sick. They're gonna stay. So that's a great question. I think we tend not to think of it. We just think of counseling, right? Not anymore. Counseling is there's so many adjuncts we have now that we can use. They're expensive though. That's going to be the problem. And so the treatment centers that make a lot of money are going to be able to, or have big benefactors or grants and things can do that. Treatment centers that don't have that are probably going to struggle. So I would think many countries will struggle to have the resources to use some of that technology, at least initially. But I think it's the future. I mean, we'll always have counseling, but but I think the technology will be just more and more a daily activity.
All right, sir. Thank you. Generally, for those who are still suffering from addiction, what advice can you just give to them?
um, someone with addiction.
Yes, who is suffering? Yes, sir.
Um, so I think about the concept of resilience, and resilience basically says if you can not let your fear drive the bus, and to address your fear, be aware of your fear, and that we tend to think that heroes don't have fear. No, every hero story I ever read, the hero, some combat guy that did something heroic, says, "Oh no, I was scared. I just didn't let it stop me." And so often clients are so embarrassed by what they did, and they're so ashamed of what they did and who they've hurt, that that and they have been anesthetizing the pain. So now suddenly they don't have alcohol or drugs to feel better when they feel bad. And so I think the best recommendation I can make for people that are new in recovery is to recognize that A, it's really hard, and B, we're asking them to do things that they haven't been able to do for a really long time. So if they can build resilience and hang in there and learn how to feel bad, then I think they have a pretty good chance of really embracing the recovery process, because it, it's not it's not easy for a long time. So that would be the first thing: is um, you know develop some resilience. Don't let the pain drive you. You have to own it. I think the other is it's about the social support. That idea of, well, I don't need to go to meetings. I don't need to have all that. I can I now that I know I have this, I can pretty much do it on my own. I'm a smart guy, right? I can do that. And then it's like, yeah, some people just quit one day for no reason other than they realize they need to. Others don't have that luxury, and so my thing is make as many colleagues, as many friends, get to know as many people in recovery, and have some, not be humiliated, but have some humility in the idea of there are people further ahead in this process than I am. I need to ask them for help sometimes, rather than being embarrassed by asking for help. And in many cultures, asking for help is not a very valued thing. And it's certainly in the United States these days, um, asking for help is not necessarily valued like it could or should be. And the third one is pay attention to your family's history. If there was addiction in prior generations, then that's going to impact how your family is going to heal. And so if there was addiction or trauma or medical issues, that it didn't start with us. It started three generations or more before us. And so um, a lot of times families with addiction keep it a big secret. And so the person in treatment says, well, I don't know if my grandfather was an alcoholic. Well, ask. It's important to understand that it's not, um, we want to get all the information we can to make it easier. And if we understand that my granddad was an alcoholic, then I can understand why my mom and dad behaved the way they did. I can understand maybe how I was parented. Um, I was teaching a doctoral class several years ago, and I asked the class, do you think you can change the past? And every single person in the class said, no, no, past happened. And And they looked at me and they said, you disagree? And I said, yeah, I disagree completely. You can't change the events of the past, but you can change your understanding of the past. and you're changing your understanding of what happened and maybe why it happened and how it happened. Like, I'll give you an example of where in my own life, when I realized how much trauma my mother had, it like opened this like door to feeling such empathy for her because her life had been so hard as a kid. And so a lot of times we don't want to look at three generations. We just want to do it ourselves and being open to things that may be uncomfortable.
All right, sir. Thank you very much. I would like to ask, from the ancestors that we had in the past, what do you think you would have loved to, bring back to our present time today?
Mm. Well, I know what I'd like to get rid of in the present day. Social media is a big one. Um, I mean, I think in the addiction world, um, our ancestors lived at a time when there wasn't the medical advancements. In the United States, we put them in insane asylums and we put them in jail. We treated them really harshly. Um, they didn't, there weren't, no one with therapists. That didn't. There were psychiatrists, but so. Um, What I would like to bring back is a world that's less complicated and is less stressful. The research on kids and high anxiety is through the roof. I just read an article today that was talking about PTSD on college campuses and how it's just so significantly more. And I think the simplicity of the early days of the recovery method, like AA in the 1930s, there weren't so many contrary ideas. There was a little simpler process, and I wish we had more of that.
All right, Mike Barnes, I want to use this opportunity to appreciate you for the little time you gave to me. Thank you so much for your time and the effort that you made, use it to make it a successful one. Thank you very much, sir.
Thank you so much for inviting me to be on the show.
All right, have a wonderful day, sir. Bye-bye.
Thanks.